Hey everyone, welcome back to Heart to the Abyss. Today's project started when I came across the Time Dragon model from Rescale Miniatures. I instantly fell in love with it, and I knew I wanted to build a diorama around this dragon. I also decided to make this piece as my entry for the Squidmar Open competition. And before we get into it, if you enjoy this kind of builds, feel free to subscribe, leave a like or comment. It really helps the channel. Thank you for watching. With the frame ready, I started building up the terrain using random pieces of scrap foam. The main thing I was focused on here was height. I really wanted the mountains to feel tall and enclosing, like the space in the middle is being watched from all sides. I wasn't aiming for clean shapes or symmetry. I just kept stacking, gluing and adjusting until the walls started to feel heavy and closed in. Once the bulk was there, I carved in the rocky texture across the entire scene and shaped a small island that will sit in the center. Once the terrain was fully carved, I covered everything in a base coat made from black paint, Mod Podge and plaster. It hardens the foam and gives the whole piece a much stronger surface to work on. But it also helps pull everything together. All the separate foam pieces start to read as one solid structure instead of layers glued on top of each other. After the base coat dried, I noticed a few areas still felt a bit too flat. So I added a couple of smaller plaster rocks, mainly to break up those surfaces and give the terrain a bit more variation. Once those were in place, I started fitting in the Time Dragon model. I already knew roughly where I wanted to sit, but I did have to trim away some parts of the model so it would fit naturally into the scene. For the center of the scene, I wanted a small castle sitting on the island. I built it from small pieces of XPS foam and fitted it directly into the rock, so it feels connected to the terrain rather than just placed on top of it. I kept the shapes fairly simple, nothing too detailed or decorative, as I kept the castle small in scale, especially compared to the surrounding terrain. That way the mountains and the dragon feel much larger and more imposing in comparison. I like the idea that this place wasn't meant to impress anyone. It was built to be functional and stay hidden. While I was building it, the story behind the place started to take shape. I began to imagine this as an ancient keep where mages once lived, far away from the rest of the world. They didn't come here to rule or defend anything, they came here to be left alone, to experiment, push magic further than they could anywhere else. The dragon sensed it. The keep was destroyed, the magic was silenced, and the dragon stayed behind, not to claim the place as its own, but to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. After the castle was in place, I blended the plaster rocks and the castle into the surrounding terrain with a thicker plaster mix. It helps hide seams, soften transitions, and make the rocks and the castle feel like they belong to the same structure. With everything blended together, I started painting by giving the entire diorama a black base coat using my airbrush. For the castle, I wanted it to be a lighter color, a beige tone, so it stands out clearly against the darker stone around it. So I first gave it a base coat of white, and then went over it with a beige. From there, I built up the rocks using a dark grey base and several layers of dry brushing. Each pass getting lighter with less paint on the brush, just to slowly bring out the texture without overpowering it. After the dry brushing, I went in with a few very thin watered down color washes. In nature, rocks are rarely just grey. Depending on minerals, moisture and age, you see hints of yellow, brown, blue and green. So I layered those colors in while it was still wet, and used a paper towel to absorb some of the paint and soften the effect. Once that was done, I'd lightly dry brushed a pale grey over everything to tie the colors together and catch the areas where light would naturally hit. Once the painting was done, I started adding some greenery to the rocks. This part is always important to me. It helps break up all the stone, but also makes the scene feel alive. I brushed some glue onto the rocks and sprinkled on some fine green turf. Then went back in, off camera, with the watered down glue to lock everything in place. On the castle itself, I added small strands of fake sheep moss to resemble ivy slowly growing over the ruins. It helps sell the idea that this place has been abandoned for a long time, nature quietly taking it back. While painting the dragon, I kept thinking more about its role in this place. This wasn't a random attack, and it wasn't a battle. The mages didn't build their keep here to rule, or to defend anything. They came here to disappear, hidden between the mountains, far from the rest of the world. They could work without being seen, without being questioned. At first, maybe it was curiosity, or ambition. But whatever they were experimenting with here, it didn't stay contained. Magic has a way of leaving marks, not just on places, but on the world around them. And something noticed. The dragon sensed it, not as an act of conquest, but as a response. It came down on the keep, tearing it apart stone by stone. The magic was silenced. The experiments ended. The dragon didn't leave. It stayed. Not to rule what was left, and not to claim it as its own. It stayed to watch. Make sure that whatever happened here never happens again. After I finished painting the dragon, I went back in and added a bit more greenery to the ruins. Some fine turf to push the ivy effects further, and a few small trees to help sell the scale. These were actually miniature Christmas trees. I trimmed them down so they sit right in the scene without overpowering the castle. To finish off the depth of the scene, I painted the background above the mountains in a dark blue. It helps push everything back visually and creates a colder, more distant feeling behind the terrain. For the lake around the island, I poured the 2-part epoxy resin into the base. I wanted water here to separate the island from the rest of the terrain and to make the castle feel more isolated. It creates a natural barrier and it slows the scene down a bit. Everything feels quieter around water. In the background, I used some UV resin to create a small waterfall running down the rocks. It's a small detail, but it helps connect the mountains to the lake and makes the environment feel more believable. Once everything was cured, I glued the dragon into place on the ruins. I added a bit more sheet moss under its back leg to help it blend in the terrain and make it feel grounded. To finish the atmosphere, I added a small LED strip along the top of the diorama. I covered it with a darkened cotton to diffuse the light and create an impression of low clouds hanging between the mountains. I made sure while gluing on the cotton I didn't glue it directly onto the LED strip to make sure it isn't a fire hazard. And for the final touch-up, I painted the edges with black 1.0 to frame the piece and keep the focus inside the scene. And now, onto the final result.